Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host Chris Shang, and today we've got Deepak Anchala, who is a two-time founder, former founder and CEO of Slintel, which exited to 6 Sense. He spent some time there, probably in terms of like helping with the transition. But tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps what you're working on right now.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, thank you for having me. Quick introduction. I think Chris did a brief intro. So I was the founder of Slintel, which we had run for about 4 years before exiting to 6 Sense back in 2021. Um, Prior to Slintel, I was part of the zero to one journey in a couple of different companies. One was Eightfold and the other called Traction. One went IPO, the other was a unicorn. So I learned the zero to one journey, and then in Slintel, we actually implemented it for our own startup. Prior to that, I was in investment banking at the beginning of my career. When the banking crash happened, found my way to banking tech and then core tech. And I've been living in the Valley for the last many years and been a startup guy through and through. Um, so once the exit to 6Sense happened, I stayed there for about 3 years and I was leading product there for a good portion of the portfolio. Just 2 months ago, I quit 6Sense and I'm on to my new venture. It's still in stealth. We're still figuring things out, but it's a company in the AI agentic space. That's what I'm on to next.
Got it. Very cool. So you mentioned, kind of you're in the investment banking finance space before you got into kind of like your first startup and doing more of like that zero, going and joining and seeing the zero to one motion. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, why'd you go into finance in the very beginning?
Yeah, sure. So I did my MBA
Yeah.
and right after engineering, and I
Yeah.
really wanted to get like into finance or consulting at that point in time. It was like everybody talked about iBanking and all the cool stuff they do and the deals they broker. So that's what got me into iBanking in the first place. And I just wanted to make deals happen. And in a way, iBanking is also a form of selling, right? You're trying to
Yep.
sell products there. So got into it. My first job was in Sydney in Australia, right off campus. So I went there and worked there for a year. This was 2008-9 timeframe. And then the financial crisis happened and half the iBanking jobs were wiped away in like that year. And slowly, like I moved out of it. I moved out of it to like, I moved to Citibank and then finally said, hey, tech is eating the world. So why don't I try my hand at tech? And that's when I started venturing into that area.
Got it. So you're actually resilient enough to go back into finance even after the financial crisis happened, and then ultimately found your own way later on into tech.
Yeah, it took me a while to kind of break away from finance, right? Even after the crisis, I was still like, no, I need to give it one more shot.
Fair
and
enough.
yeah, and I stuck to that for a while. But finance taught me a lot of interesting skills, right? Like I was in iBanking in the beginning, and then I moved to wealth management when I was in Citibank. And there I was essentially like a door-to-door salesman, right? Like wealth management, you're selling to HNIs, high net worth individuals. And I used to go to like I used to meet people in offices of Google, Microsoft, a bunch of companies meeting executives. I used to stand outside the door, sometimes waiting for 1 hour or 2 hours to meet the exec, right? So sales was thrown at me at a brutal way, right? Where I learned rejection, like, straight out of college, you have no idea of what rejection is, a very little idea. And then you stood up, and then after 2 hours, the person comes and says, hey, you know what? Like, let's meet tomorrow. I have a busy day today, right? Or I'm not interested. So I think I did about 500 of those like door-to-door salesmanish efforts there, and just that thickened my skin a lot and set up the seeds for my future like endeavors in sales. But that was my first exposure. But I initially I hated it that I used to get rejected so many times, but now then I dealt with it. Then I started to love it. Then I was like, you're only looking for that one person that says yes out of 99 people like that say no, right? So it became like a challenge in itself to find that one person who says yes.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's lost on salespeople now, and younger generations is like not having gone through that exercise or cold calling, right? Which is the most brutal parts of sales, but like it does thicken your skin. It builds up tenacity. It builds up, I think, wherewithal to like, I think mostly because like people are afraid, like inherently fearful of rejection, right? Like for whatever reason, psychologically, it just like probably doesn't wear on you well. But it's so critical, I feel like, as an experience for people to go through to understand that it's nothing personal. Like it's not personal at all. It's just, and then it forces you to be like, uh, understanding like how, once you get over the fact that's not personal, then you're like trying to iterate and experiment as quickly for the ideal outcome of what you're trying to accomplish. And that bottom line, I think, is like so instrumental for, startups and for building a successful one specifically. Working with a lot of founders, I feel like that's probably sometimes like the biggest bottleneck is like that they still have that bit of fear, that fear of rejection, fear of like what the customer is going to say. And it ends up they drag their feet on their go to market versus like being less fearful and then trying a bunch of different things, which I'm sure kind of like helped you with the different successes that you were able to see ultimately in the future, especially in tech. But talk to us a little bit about that, right? So you transition from Citi and you go into the world of tech. You mentioned working at a few startups, going from the 0 to 1 becoming a unicorn. Like, what was that like in terms of, if you can try to backtrack your mind into some of those memories, and like, what was that feeling like?
Yeah.
What was some of that initial experience like? What was the excitement like? Was it all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is so much easier for me to sell than financial services or wealth management? There's like a real ROI that allows me to differentiate this product or service from whatever the landscape is. Because I feel like that's, it's not a commodity necessarily most of the times, especially in the earlier days. And I feel like, financial services, wealth management is somewhat of a commoditized product, and it's somewhat difficult to sell other than you're trying to sell yourself.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you talked about a lot of different things there. And if I were to go back down my memory lane, right? The way I look at life is it's a set of events that teaches you different things at different
Right.
times in place, right? So when I really wanted to make my way to the valley and I wanted to join the startup because and I'd never seen startups before. I was working for big banks, big tech. I think the smallest company I worked for was like a 10,000 employee company until
Yeah.
then. And I had spent 10 years of my life in those companies, right? So I really, really wanted to move into the startup world and understand what it means. And I had to unlearn everything. And it was, but the seeds of the 0 to 1 journey, like making that successful, all started at the very beginning, like getting faced with rejections, going through big tech, learning how processes are built in big tech helps a lot when you start up, right? So when I moved, I remember vividly that I moved from Dallas to the Bay Area, and we had just bought a house in Dallas, and my wife was 5 months pregnant at that time, and I told her, "Hey, we have to move." And she was like, What are you even saying? We just bought a house, and we are, we're expecting a baby, and you want me to move?" So we moved, and then we downsized from like a 2,500 square feet house in Dallas to like a 700 square foot house. So we had to sell all our furniture. We didn't know where to put like stuff, and to top it all, I mean, she was at that time, getting her maternity break. I was moving into a startup from big tech, right?
Yeah.
So I land in the valley and I meet the founder and we had a good conversation. And the second day, like I had a sales number, right? I was like, hit $1 million or whatever revenue in this period of time. And basically, I was told that if you don't hit it by a certain period of time, then you never know like what happens in startups. Jobs are risky and you have to hit. And that hit me really, really hard because I was not even used to anything like that in a big company. It's secure jobs and you don't have to worry so much about your day to day. So then that sunk in. And when I started selling, I started calling, cold calling, emailing, things I've never done before in big tech. And I had a target. And I joined as the head of sales, so I could build a team after I was successful too. So I took up the challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in those days, it was a lot of brute force. It was a lot of hustle. When you are selling a very, very early stage product, people are not buying the product, they're buying the vision and they're buying you, right? Like there's not much to sell, right? So you have to really build relationships. And that's where, Chris, I learned that every relationship matters. And every no that is a no right now may not be a no in the future, right? Like no's today turned into yeses 3 months later. Like if you keep at it, if you keep meeting people and build relationships, it was all relationship driven. So met my targets. Actually, I exceeded my targets in a short amount of time. Built a team. We had 5 sales team members, and we like got that startup off the ground, right? So, but pretty good learning experience. Now, when I went to the second company after that, again I was like the first business hire. They had a team of 7 people, and all rockstar engineers from Google, LinkedIn, Facebook. And I had to go through the 0 to 1 journey. Again, I realized different product. The first product was selling to VCs. The second product was in the HR tech space. And if you have sold to HR or finance buyers, it's a very hard sell, right? People don't buy that easily in that space, right? So again, very different learning curve, had to relearn everything. And the first company was SMB mid-market, and the second company was enterprise strategic sales, right? So a very different sales motion, multi-threading, relationship building, different channels work. You have to go show yourself in person. So there's a lot of learning there. And I carried both those learnings with me when I started my third company. Actually, when I started Slintel, which was my third 0 to 1 journey, my bad. It was my first company, but all those learnings carried forward. And the best thing about like all of this journey is also was, apart from the sales learning, I also learned product. I saw working in small teams, you're very close to the product team, the engineering team, the marketing. So I picked up bits and pieces of all of that, right? And I also, the best part was my company, Slintel, was in sales tech. And I started Slintel because of a pain point that I was seeing myself when selling in the previous companies, right? Which was essentially that the buyers, when we picked up the phone call, buyers, they used to ask us all kinds of questions, right? And we would ask them a bunch of questions. Hey, what's your budget? Do you have a need? The band questionnaire. What technologies do you use? When are they coming up for renewal and all of that? And I sat there thinking, like, this information in the information age should already be available. Like, why am I calling people and asking all these questions? And that's when we started looking at trends like, hey, buyers are becoming more and more anonymous. And by the time they talk to a sales rep, 75% of their decision making is already done. They've gone to competitor sites, right? They've gone to your site. So can we cover any of those signals, uncover any of those signals? Can we show technologies they use, predict what will they buy, when will they buy, and predict who's buying, right? So that became like the genesis of Slintel, and all those learnings like helped me build that company.
Got it. Very cool. And then in terms of like the hyper growth that you guys saw at Slintel, to be acquired, what was that journey like? And I mean, I would imagine that you're doing a lot more of the same, but maybe like with much more gas and maybe like exponential pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Like Slintel was like a completely different beast, right? When we were scaling it, the first 1.5 year was extremely difficult as a first time founder, very hard for me to raise money. I think at the end of it, like we raised about 200K, right? But once we found product market fit, then we started raising a ton of money. We raised about $25 million overall in a span of 4 years, scaled to 300 customers. So it was very hard until we found product market fit, and very easy to scale and raise money after that. But the biggest learning was 0 to 1 journeys are extremely tough, especially when you're doing your own company. It's different selling in another person's company. Like when you're doing your own, you are everything, right? Like you are the product guy, the engineering guy, the sales, marketing, CS. You have to figure out the market. You have to sometimes force create a market and figure out positioning, every single thing, you have to think through. And when you get VC funding, and we can talk about that too, but when you get VC funding and you have a board, you're answerable to the board now, right? You're not the only person in charge, right? And the conversations get pretty interesting if you don't hit numbers, right? So you have to constantly, like, it's a very high pressure game, especially when you raise VC funds and you're trying to scale super fast, right? You're trying to build things in like a year, 2 years, what other companies normally would have taken 5, 6 years to build, and you're trying to sell and scale super fast. So a lot of things break at that pace, but you still have to maintain your metrics. Yeah? You still have to have a good GRR, NRR, right? You still have to have good efficiency, burn ratios, LTV, CAC, everything matters. And at the same time, you're supposed to also throw money and scale, right? So, and this a fine line between life and death there. So there's a lot of learning in that journey.
Yeah. I mean, I often, especially for CEOs, founders that have like raised venture funding, they often say it's like a very lonely journey because you have to appear to be like the captain that knows everything that's going to happen with the ship to all of your employees. But then you also have these people, which is your board, breathing down your neck and like helping you set the course, sometimes not even helping you, but telling you where the course is or the direction needs to be without actually being the captain. And so you're just kind of like getting these directions from somebody that is kind of flying blind and not necessarily, it's a tricky position, right? And not everybody tells you that. I mean, that's one of the caveats of raising, external funding and getting external members of your board. And it's such I've definitely like had conversations with founders where it can be a great pro, and it's also can be in some instances a big con,
Yeah.
in terms of like, being a big disadvantage.
I,
So
I would say I would say you have to be really careful about who you bring on board because
yeah.
they say it's probably easier to exit out of a personal relationship than exit out of a board member relationship, right? Like
Oh,
they're
absolutely.
going to yeah, it's to be very, very careful. And yeah, and you have to balance it out. I would say you have to balance out like when the board member comes and so they bring their own perspective, right? And they have invested in so many different kinds of companies. Maybe in your space, you're the only company. So they don't know your space really, really well. They don't know your metrics, but they do apply a broader lens and say, hey, these other companies in these spaces are growing X and they're showing these metrics. So it's good information for you to understand, right? You have to benchmark eventually. But then you are the expert in your space and you have to defend your space. Why are things happening in your space? Why are things faster or slower? Why is this ratio? So so I think it gives a healthy perspective as long as everybody is in
Yeah.
their right minds and works in a very collaborative way and has patience essentially.
Yeah. Um, Interesting. And you took Slintel from, ideation to then exit. And, in that process, uh, what did you learn that you are applying, like meaning that things that worked and or didn't work, at Slintel, and or in terms of like speed to execution? What are some of those things that you've taken away? You have like almost like 3 years working for 6sense, so it's a little bit different of a role, perhaps. But now you're going off and you're doing another one that's in stealth. So I guess my question is like, why are you feeling compelled to go into another startup? And then what are some of the learnings that you've taken away from the wins and the losses to help you approach it a little bit differently this time around?
Yeah, I think if you talk to any entrepreneur, it's hard to take startups out of entrepreneurs, right? So that would be the number one reason why people start again and again
Yeah.
until they're fully burnt out, right? So I had the energy, and there's always problems in the world that you look at and you're like, hey, I can go solve this, I can go do this differently, and I feel strongly about it, and that kind of pulls you back, right? But yeah, going back in the journey, like when we got acquired by 6sense, I think it was September 2021. I stayed there almost for 3 years. Um, so the market in our space was consolidating at that time, right? The big players had made their moves, and it made logical sense for us to join hands, and it was a good deal for everyone. And there was a good. It was not just good teams merging. There was a good culture balance between the two companies, right? So I would say the first year and a half were all spent in like merging teams, processes, code, right? The code bases are very different. Generally, you have to merge codes. It takes a lot of time. And then relaunching like a product. So we did all of that. And then after that, I stayed to make sure this was successful. Like like a lot of acquisitions fall through typically. Like even after acquisition, it's very hard to make them successful and make them work. And I felt like a an ethical responsibility to make sure that works and make sure the employees of Slintel are also happy there, right? So we stayed on, launched this product, and that product really took off. Once we launched it, we had to also realize that you have to enable sellers in 6sense or in the big company to sell your product, right? Because they may not always be motivated to sell that. So now you have to devise the right incentive structure. You have to kind of have the right spiffs, have the right enablement. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I would say post acquisition, it's not like, hey, I've sold the company, I can go back and relax. And I mean, you do that for a week or two, but you come back, there's a lot of work, and you have to spend that much amount to make it successful. So that was my reason for like staying there, and the reason for moving out. Like I said, startup bug bit me again, and I wanted to see like how far can I go this time to the new company.
Got it. And then any specific takeaways from your previous experiences that you're applying differently to this time around, or you're imagining you're going to be able to shortcut certain things?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me, like in this new company, was ride the wave, right? Like if there is no wave, or don't go against the wave for sure, right? You're going to drown. And don't go sideways also, because if you go sideways, you go here and there, but you don't really make progress. You ride the wave. And when I was doing Slintel, there was a little bit of a wave, like which was, hey, buyers will become anonymous. So that is a small micro trend that we said, if we go deeper and deeper, then we can get more and more signals and we can build something. But it wasn't, I would say, it wasn't a massive wave, right? It was a trend that we were seeing. Right now, I think with AI, I do like, and there are people on both sides of the spectrum. I do believe that this is a huge shift, just like the mobile wave or the internet wave. AI is enabling completely new use cases. It's making people more productive. It's getting virtual assistants everywhere, and there's the whole world's changing, and will look very different in 5, 10 years from now. So it's like, yeah, at least one of the learnings was build with the wave and build something where there is like a very strong pull in the market and be one of the first movers in that space, whatever space you're choosing, right? So that was learning one. And then I think the other learnings are, some things that we did right in Slintel too were like find design partners early, make sure you're building a product that there's a market for. Otherwise, don't waste your time, don't waste engineering time. All your hours are precious. You'd rather go work in a company, right? So really, really validate, continue to validate, and make sure nobody's effort is going wasted, right? And third thing is prioritization. I think as a startup, you want to do a lot of different things, and you want to build everything. Everything is like this fancy thing that you want to build, but you'll burn people out. And startups are generally a long journey. The most successful companies, operate for at least 10 years, right? So you have to think through that lens and say, I need to be brutal in prioritizing what I'll build in year one and year two and year three. I'm not going to burn my team out. I'm going to find the most important pain points in the market and just build that and just keep doing that year after year. So relentless prioritization and violent execution. Once you prioritize, I think those become like super important. So yeah, some learnings I carry forward. And also, access to great talent, right? I think people say this, like typically you need different kinds of talent at different stages of the company, right? When you're building in the 0 to 1 stage, you need people who can do everything, like jack of all trades, who are very deep, but also who are not worried to like do all the dirty work in the company, right? And then you want like people who can scale, and then you want people who can manage large teams, people who are experts. So just knowing who to look for and how to make sure like they all come together, because you in organizations you have to have that culture and you have to have everything set up really, really well, right? So the team can function very well together. So yeah, all of those are like learnings, and I continue to learn in the new company too. But I would say the journey is definitely, so far it's been smoother than the first company.
Fair enough. As we're kind of running up on time, just a few more questions here, but how do you feel that how do you feel like the landscape has changed, right? Do you think a Slintel could exist in today's market? Because there's so many, not exist, but like start a new one or a new version of that. Like if you were to start a Slintel today, how do you think it will be received? Because I feel like there's been so many changes and evolution in this space specifically that we've seen within the past probably a year or 2 years, specific, specific to that time frame. That's really kind of, I think, like, yeah, changed a lot of what we had seen that bull run for like SaaS for the past 10 years.
Yeah, I think SaaS apps all are evolving, right? All the legacy SaaS apps, they're figuring out not just embedding AI in their products, like that's the easiest thing to do, right? But they're also figuring out, should their pricing model change, monetization, should the way they acquire users, should the whole product like change, right? And that's because the AI companies are kind of forcing the legacy companies to change too. Like there's all kinds of new companies. I'm sure you've heard of AI CRMs coming up, right? Where people are saying, why do you need to like even type in a single thing on a CRM? Like you can just call an email from the CRM itself and everything is auto-populated in CRM, right? So AI CRMs, and on the sales space, you hear AI BDRs, AI inbound SDRs, AI call recording agents. So there's AI being used everywhere, sometimes as features, sometimes as entire platform. And I think specific to your question, if you were to build Slintel again, I would say Slintel was in the data space, right? If we were a sales intelligence company. Today, like a lot of data that you want, like where you want, and data, you want to give data that gives an edge to sellers and gets them the ability to win over others, right? So there's always that edge. And not all of that data is publicly available, right? Some of it is behind gated paywall. Sometimes you have to partner with vendors, etc. Sometimes, you have to create your own data and you have to like get second party, third, first party intent. So I think that differentiation will continue to exist for some time until it reaches a stage maybe where using AI, you kind of reduce the gap, right? Because there's still a gap, like there's still the access gap in the data space, right? But maybe once AI reaches that stage where it becomes more ubiquitous and we can get any data sets with a very high degree of accuracy and you probably get there. But I would also argue that all things equal, right? When you have 10 sales teams in a space competing against each other, they're all looking for that extra insight and that extra data point. And like, what is special, right? You have to reach somebody that nobody else is reaching at that time, or very few people are reaching, and you have to go with the right messaging and and you have to show the right research. And so there's a lot of science that goes into it. So I will always say like there will be some advantage, like if you figure out like new ways of getting data and figure out things that nobody else is figuring out, there's always going to be a market for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I was just thinking about this real quick too, is that as you're talking, is that you just talk about salespeople, try to get the edge for the salespeople, right? And I think like I just had a conversation with like a sales engineer at Reich this earlier today, and he was talking about what his role is and what he's trying to bring to the table there, and he used to work for the company that bought out Reich ultimately, and the idea of being able to take whatever, like his role in his job specifically is like to take whatever is promised to solve for a specific problem statement from a customer, that it actually is fully realized. So it ultimately will impact, retention and expansion revenue, right? And making sure that they're happy. And I think like in that buyer journey, one of the things that to me is also interesting that is often missed is that sales engineer component, or like at least the thinking of that, where it's as smooth of a transition to go from awareness, education, buying, and using. And where I see a lot of companies that struggle is between like the sale to the retention, where it's just like they don't fully deliver on what was promised, because the switching of the teams or the switching of the guards is like it becomes lost in translation, right? And that obviously impacts then like how somebody thinks about a product. And I think there's also this caveat around like user adoption or like team buy-in that is somewhat difficult to quantify from like an AI perspective. And because like you have different personality types that either may fully buy into it or may not fully buy into it. And it's also contingent upon the managers and how strong and how competent they are at communicating the reason why something does exist, because sometimes new technologies can be threatening for certain people, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious as to your thoughts on that, as somebody who's kind of like been pretty like deep in the weeds around like sales intelligence and and probably like really trying to dive into like that buyer journey and their experience. But I feel like there's almost this like missing piece of like trying to fully understand, because you could take almost, I feel like the exact same company, exact same size of company within the same vertical, but because of it's populated by different teammates or different people between company A and company B, the usage of that product or that whatever they buy is going to be different because of that very difficult to quantify part of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right. Like people use products differently, and personas are different in different teams, right? And different people. I think the crux of it is that I think if you look at it as a buyer, when you're buying and using products, and you said one very important point, you said bridge the gap between sales and customer success, right? Because sales sells something, and then
Yeah.
you have different kinds of personas coming on products, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a product issue, sometimes it's a persona issue, sometimes it's something else, right? It's something lost in translation. And I was attending an event recently where a CRO said, if somebody can build a product that bridges the gap between sales, customer success, and improves adoption retention, that's a big space, right? So go build something there. But that's a real problem today. And the way I look at AI enabling all of this is that I think in today's world, like the right way to look at AI is basically it's an enabler for every single function, every single persona, right? Like you can have a virtual CSM, you can have like maybe AI BDR, you can have virtual teammates in AI complementing teammates or helping you with information that wasn't easily accessible or available. And not just helping people on the seller customer success side, but also helping people on the buyer side, right? Buyers are, when they're using products, they're always lost and they have questions, and it's hard to pick up the phone and talk to a CSM every time. Like, what if you're in Europe and your team is in US, right? Like this time, there's all kinds of issues, right? So I think that's where AI can, having virtual CSMs, having like access to information that was not available at different time zones, all of that just eases the friction in the buying team. You can also like reduce the friction between personas, right? Like a very frustrated user asking a question versus like very happy user asking a question. You can kind of like have AI tweak its tone, look at the sentiment, intent of the users, and then give answers on the buying side. And on the selling side too, you can have like, let's say you're having a busy day and you're not able to show up at work. You can have your assistant kind of at least, respond on your behalf, or you can delegate tasks to your assistant and get stuff done. You can move, like, I think people will always up level, right? When you have AI BDRs coming in, and I don't think AI BDRs can do everything BDRs are doing today, but they can do some parts of it. So then the BDR also elevates themselves to like a different role, right? They go and like say, I'll be the strategic person. I'll be feeding inputs in. So I'll do the prompt engineering. I'll tell the AI BDR what to do, who to target, how to target, or I'll go become an AE. So I think AI is going to like upskill everyone, and I don't think like, I think humans will still like, over time they would have maybe all of us will have personal assistants, right? And maybe companies will have a ton of AI agents, but I just see that productivity increasing manifold with the help of AI, like making its way to all these companies.
Got it. Very cool. On that note, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time today, sharing your insights, your visibility around what you've built, and what that experience was like with Slintel, and just your background and how you made your different leaps in your career. And whenever you're ready to kind of share and launch what it is that you're working on, let me know. I'm happy to promote it and publicize it here. But yeah, best of luck on the new venture. I'm sure it's going to be amazing in terms of like your intelligence and what you brought from your previous experiences to solving the next big problem.
I hope so too. Pretty excited about it. Thank you, Chris, and let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you.